Good morning, everyone. Today we are looking at a couple of lessons from Isaiah chapter 49. And this particular chapter is one that has an interesting dynamic to it. You see from the very beginning of the chapter that God talks about the fact that Israel is his child. As a matter of fact, he uses the analogy that of even Israel coming out of the womb, and that Israel is his child in every respect, that he is the one who made her, he is the one who raised her, as it were, and he is the one who has taken care of her and will continue to take care of her. And as you go through and you read chapter 49, there are a number of different passages that you might want to highlight, but I'm going to pull out just two of them this morning that were interesting from the standpoint of even going outside of the realm of what he's talking about in the main course of the discussion here in chapter 49. The first one is found here in verse 8, when he says, "Thus says the Lord, in an acceptable time have I heard you, and in the day of salvation I have helped you. I will preserve you and give you as a covenant to the people, to restore the earth, to cause them to inherit the desolate heritages." This particular passage is one that is actually quoted in the New Testament. And it is used by the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 1 and 2, where he quotes it and he says, For it has been said, in an acceptable time I've heard you, in the day of salvation I've helped you. And then he goes on to say, Behold, now is the acceptable time. Behold, now is the day of salvation. And so you have this recognition in verse 8 that Paul is going to use in the New Testament, that at the right time, when things are set and when the time of comfort is to be here, you will be able to do these things, or you will be called upon to do these things. And under the new covenant, Paul says that time is now. That now is the acceptable time because Christ has come and all of those things have taken place. And so there's a recognition from Isaiah chapter 49 and in verse 8 of some things that Paul's going to utilize in the first century to speak to the church about what the acceptable time is and about the power of the gospel now as the day of salvation and not as something in the future that we're still waiting on. And so I found that to be a very interesting crossover from this Old Testament passage in Isaiah 49 over to what Paul has to say in 2 Corinthians chapter 6. The second area that I wanted to pull out was a very strong sentiment and a very strong parallel that God brings out in verse number 15. He's making the point in these verses that he has not forgotten about his people. As a matter of fact, in verse 14, he says, Zion says, that's the people of Israel, the Lord has forsaken me, and the Lord has forgotten me. That all God doesn't care about us anymore. God isn't worried about us anymore. All it is judgment and desolation and all of these various things. And yet he makes the statement in verse 15. He says, Can a woman forget her nursing child and not have compassion on the son of her womb? Surely they may forget, yet I will not forget you. You know, this particular passage is describing a rhetorical question. He says, Can a woman forget her nursing child? We have 5 boys. And one thing that we learned very quickly is that mama never forgets about baby. And baby makes sure that mama never forgets about him. And so on and so forth. But you have here a situation where he says, would a mother forget about her child? Would a mother not have compassion on the son of her womb? He says, even if they were to forget, even if the answer to that in some rare instance would be no, I will not forget you. You are my child. And as such, You are constantly before me, and I am constantly concerned about you, and I will not forget you. Now take just a moment to make application to us in our day and time, because obviously he's talking about Israel in those days, in the Old Testament promises. But you know, the same promises are made to us, and we are described over and over again as Christians in the New Testament as the children of God. As such, does he forget us? Does he no longer pay attention to us? Does he not care about us? Well, certainly not, because he does not forget his children, nor does he ignore them. Things may not always go the way that we want them to. Things may not always happen the way that we wished they would, and we may not always see why it was necessary for us to endure certain things, or why things happen the way that they do. But God has not forgotten us, and he will not leave us or forsake us. Those are some of the things that I pulled out of chapter 49. Certainly always interested to see and hear what it is that you might have to add, or what you might have seen in contrast. But tomorrow we will pick up with an examination of Isaiah chapter 50. And until then, have a great day.